from being dazzled by keeping. So this video is about the Orange Order because one of my numberless faithful viewers most humbly requested that I produce a video on this head. So here, question number one: it was founded. Some people say 1795, some people say slightly earlier, of the diamond Loch Gall that was founded, that being a town in County Armagh, or possibly slightly down Winter's cottage there in mid Armagh, where the organisation was, because Ireland was in ferment at the time. It was shortly after the French Revolution, and so Ireland, we were a Pertwright society. We had two of us were Catholics, that's about 70% of us, and the remainder were Protestant. They were there because they dissented from the Westminster Confession of Faith. Anyhow, the Orange Order was owners of the Church of Ireland. So 1517 or thereabouts, the Reformation kicked off. Come to Ireland about 20 years later with the establishment of the Church of Ireland, but the majority of us remained adherents of the Church of Rome. And the community in Ireland were concentrated particularly on the East 2 counties. The Protestants would have comprised a majority in about 7 of them, as in, yes, we were cut off halfway through. People, perhaps I think we had a single coal mine in Ireland. We had very few metals in Ireland. So people wanted to own land, and the way to get rich, well, I suppose there were some trades, there were some professions, but the main resource was land. Those who were Protestants, and I'm using it in the modern term as to include dissenters, were usually more recent English, Welsh, or Scots. So there was fisticuffs over land, were enfranchised, and everybody else. To an Anglophone Protestant landlord, obviously how much Irish is spoken depends on where in the country we are. On the Atlantic seaboard, we spoke Irish almost exclusively. On the eastern seaboard, speak Irish unless you just moved in from the west. And then obviously in the middle of the country is a bit of a mix. Many people are bilingual. And over time, the English language was spreading. Some underground agrarian organization saying, well, let's exact vengeance on this rapacious landlord, or he evicted somebody else. We don't like this carpetbagger who's coming in, renting out that farm when somebody's been evicted. We've got to make an example of him. We've got to show the landlord that if you boot somebody off the land who's been renting for generations, you can't move somebody else in because that person's going to get it in the neck. So going around intimidating people, poison pen letters, stealing sheep, or evangelism. So these clandestine organizations were doing that kind of thing, as they would see it in enforcing social justice, and sometimes being against Protestants as a whole or against Catholics as a whole. It's one of these Catholic organizations, and because these organizations had to exist in secret, our notion of them is necessarily sketchy. They were shadowy. So occasionally these people were caught in their court records. How much can we rely on the testimony of, say, prosecution witnesses or even defense witnesses who might wish to minimize their involvement, or prosecution witnesses might wish to be more damning? Depend upon the veracity of the Pepo Day boys, as in they were strong as an oak. Oak is also a metaphor for oak meaning the royal family, and that they were royalists as well as low. They ought to clear off out. Of course, I can't be entirely sure what their ideology was because they didn't produce many documents saying what it was. These would be incriminating themselves. Actually, there was a law passed against oath-bound societies, and William Orr paid with his, vertebral column for breaking that. Swearing people in against him was slender, to say the least. 2 soldiers, one of whom I think sent to dangle on the end of a hemp. People strangled over about 20 minutes, their legs not being bound, so they could kick like anything else. Dancing, as they called it. It was barbarians and Protestants at Loch Gall, and in 1795, and that's prevalent, and they're very much for the crown monarchy. And the Catholic Church was certainly monarchist. So obviously, France had its head in 1790 authorities. And so the political nation was Protestant. They were allowed to be members of Parliament, justices of the peace, and so forth. But the government of Ireland was jittery about, in case there was an all-out Catholic insurrection, made serious concessions. 1793, we got right to vote, but obviously if you met the poverty qualifications, very few people. Maynooth was open. That's a Catholic seminary. That's to say, training priests with a generous government from the generous donation of the government of Great Britain, not the Irish government. Remember, in Ireland we had a king, George III. He was also king of Great Britain, but he never came to Ireland. Our Parliament at College Green, Dublin, had a House of Lords, House of Commons, and it had legislative independence. It was no longer subject to Poynings law, as in Sir Edward Poynings had passed out, I think it's 1587, to say that all our legislation had to come under the Great Seal of England, had to be approved by England, but that was gone. Theobald Wolfe Tone was its luminary, and he was born in Kildare to a Catholic mother and a Protestant father, although his mother apparently crossed the Tiber after he was born. His surname is actually Tone. Wolfe is after a family friend, that he's got some sort of disputed paternity. Perhaps his mother was having it away with somebody else. And indeed, he's distantly related to James Wolfe, the conqueror of Quebec, the one who died in the Heights of Abraham. Wolfe Tone, he wanted to be a British Army officer and been spurned. So was his revolutionism a case of sour grapes? Just possibly. He became imbued with radical notions and sought to turn Ireland into France, because he was fired by this revolutionary zeal, and was a great admirer of the changes which had been wrought in France since the 14th of July 1789, and wanted to do likewise in the Emerald Isle. So he travelled to France, and he entreated the Directory over there to dispatch troops to West Britain with a view to severing all our links to Great Britain, or perhaps I'll call it East Ireland. So he said he wanted to substitute the common name of Irishman for Catholic, Protestant, and Dissenter, and have done with dissensions in Ireland, but obviously wanted to create a great dissension between us and our immediate neighbour to the east, despite him being not so distant English stock. Anyhow, so that June 1798, a rebellion kicked off, and the Orange Order was dead against it. It was more or less a Catholic jacquerie in the south east of the country, a little bit in West Cork actually. There was one clash at Skibbereen, we had an Irish army. The British Army was there as well. When I say Irish army, as in bearing allegiance to George III. The United Irishmen, they had their rebel. The United Irishmen led it, was more directly linked to the United Irishmen. A lot of the guys in Wexford who were right, the United Irishmen didn't know anything. It was pro-Protestant, and English was the same thing for them, because these people had come from England, in some cases, a little more than 100 years before English speaking and so on. So if you're an Irish speaking, some of these Irish Protestants on the East Coast had this sort of dual identity, or thought you could be minority they were in. Because of course we had no census in Ireland until 1801 area. You mightn't be aware that actually, the Orange Order totally took the side of the government. Some of them were in the yeomanry, that's to say they were bourgeois and owned a trusty steed. So if you had your own quadruped, well, it had to be a horse. As a yeoman farmer, as a clerk, as a shopkeeper, whatever. So long as you got a nag, you can be in the yeomanry, pay for a uniform and weapon. So a bit of social prestige, or indeed be in the militia. If you don't have a horse, part-time soldier, own your own musket, provide your own uniform. What an honour it is, swearing an oath to the King of Ireland, and doing your ordinary job, but doing summer training and then called out to fight when needs be, but only locally, couldn't be sent overseas. Of the 79 rebellion, but anyway, it failed, partly due to the Orange Irishman was an exclusively Catholic society, which is certainly not true. So looking into it, roughly half of the United Irishmen were Catholic and roughly half were Protestant. The upper positions were almost entirely by Protestant. They were, but that would also be the United Irishmen, just because I suppose those who had education and property, social position, were Protestants almost without exception, partly due to legal discrimination. But if we think being Protestant like that, so what to do? The United Irishmen wanted to break the connection with England, as Wolfe Tone had said before he cut his throat in 1798. Now, there's some dispute about that suicide in November 1798. Was actually his guards killing him because... Okay, so anyway, to resolve this Irish question is to have Ireland join the United Kingdom, have parity with the Protestant minority, because the Irish Parliament, being all Protestant, won't allow this. Okay, there are some broad-minded people say, of course, we shouldn't discriminate, but most of them are discriminating. They say, oh, Catholicism is associated with absolute monarchy, and they simply wish to speak our minds freely, and they would declare them religious liberty. Property is sacrosanct. A lot of douceur were liberally dispersed to parliamentarians and peers of the realm in Dublin. Our Parliament voted to say 1801 that happened. But the Orange Order had agitated against the active youth, 28-year time lag. So that was the Orange Order. And there was still a bit of sectarian fisticuffs into the early 90s. There were a number of competing organizations with the word orange in the name, not very well organized, not very localized, and not generally spread throughout the nation. So it was very unclear if they were united or they had some sort of common purpose or leadership structure. Anyway, then it was allowed again in the 1830s. There were two rival Orange Orders, and it had been a mainly lower middle class organization. But from that time, the upper middle class and indeed the aristocracy got involved, got patronage, and gained preferment in it. So there's a lodge that's like a building where you meet. What we say, 50 Orangemen might be typical, and there'd be several lodges in a district. And they existed all over Ireland, obviously heavily clustered in the northeast and Dublin, where there's a Protestant majority. I always say they're so named because they're in southern France, months after the Dutch revolt. You know, in the early 16th century, part of the Reformation taken hold in the Netherlands. The Protestant areas, that's the north, not the southern, not so much the southern areas. We now call it Belgium, the Catholic majority area, and that's why the Dutch national anthem is the Wilhelmus, as in it's an acrostic, WIAMLHELMUS. Each verse begins with one letter to spell Wilhelmus, and well, I can't remember the very first line, but it's "Ik ben een prins van Deutsches Blut, den Koning Spaniën eeuwige Raum gegeben," if I got that right. I add to how he's been monstrously mistreated by the Hispanic monarch, and therefore mere common decency impels him to take up the sword against succeed in doing with much help. Actually, the Orange family, as I say, they were effectively ruling the country for a long time, and William III is the fourth dynast to do so. It wasn't strictly primogeniture. Moritz had ruled for a while. There was William the Silent. So you have James II, the Catholic King of Ireland, and Mary of Modena, had been delivered of a bonny baby boy, James. But the rumor was put about that the infant was supposititious, was in fact not her child, was smuggled in a warming pan. It was a changeling of Orange, saying, "You're married to his daughter, Mary. Please investigate these rumors and restore our religious liberties, which are in danger." Just because James has persecuted the minority, whoever that was, he was the minority, a Catholic ruling a Protestant realm. Obviously, in Ireland, we're a Catholic realm, even though the Protestants are in charge. But I won't tell you the whole tale. But the 5th of November, 1688, William III lands with the troops in England thrice. He landed at Torbay in southwestern England, which was quite a strongly Protestant area. Assumed Timothy had landed there 3 years earlier because he was a natural son of Charles II. Thinking Battle of Sedgemoor, and indeed suspended by his neck until life was pronounced extinct. But anyway, William III was luckier, and most of James III's commanders turned their coat, went over to his side, including one John Churchill, as an ancestor of Winston Churchill, who'd been instrumental in defeating that earlier chap, the Duke of Monmouth. The king had fled, dropped the royal, but then let go. And when he took ship to France, it was then deemed to have abdicated his first cousin, Mary Stuart. They were joint sovereigns. Well, she died quite soon, but he carried on to 1701. But the Orange Order is in his honor because they say he restored liberty. But you say that, but there wasn't really freedom, or what was considered decency. And dissenters were still discriminated against by law, not as severely as Catholics were discriminated against. And even Presbyterians in Ireland could receive a heavy fine for celebrating the Lord's table. So if you were outside the established church, you were not eligible for full membership of the nation, and you would, a modern notion. Anyway, he died childless, as I say, and I think he was faithful to the marital bed. Another thing is, this rumor goes abroad that he was of homosexualist persuasion of Orange, but there are no contemporary accounts. It's only after his death people say that, but I suppose these are propagandists who were wishing to. But 17th century, almost everybody was. Even if you believed it were true, if you were a supporter of it, you wouldn't dare breathe a word of it because it would put paid to his reputation. So that was the Orange Order, and they have their Orange marches, and they're quite prominent by the late 19th century, and some Catholics took exception to them. Obviously, we got the equivalent. We got the Irish National Foresters, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which is a Catholic's only organisation. That's the rule, but bigger in the United States than it is in Ireland. Now, it's a bit like a trade union, in the way they paraded, a bit like the Freemasons. Some of the early members were Freemasons, and they borrowed very liberally from Masonic imagery and terminology, and having grand masters and worshipful masters. And it was a bit of a threat. And then forces fought on the 1st of July, 1690. But from 1752, in the British Isles, we adopted the Gregorian calendar. So we jumped 11 days forward. And Battle of the Boyne, is it defending Ulster? Well, really, it's trying to take over the whole of Ireland. But we say, yes, but wait a second. Louth is in Leinster. It is now, but at the times it was considered to be in Ulster. And that would have been the boundary of Ulster and Leinster. So these orange parades, they had out Sweet William, an allusion to William of Orange, or Orange Pope. He had a pimple on his bum, and it nip, 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 so sore. So he asked King Billy for to rub it with a lily, and it nip, 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 no more. So expressing disrespect towards the Pope, saying is the whore of Babylon mentioned in the Bible, or ridiculous things like that. So some of them is just barking mad, and some of it's faintly amusing. And so there's often a party atmosphere. They're often not especially religious people or in the Orange Order. They wouldn't claim that they are. And so it's all over the world, but obviously it's mostly Northern Ireland now. The Republic of Ireland, they exist, but they keep a very low profile. One march at Brosnola, Wales, was very, very minor in England, Wales, and Scotland. And they have existed in Canada, the United States, the Maldives, Ghana, but they're very, very minor. Read the Catholic Orange Men of Togo. I can't remember the chap's name. He was a British ambassador to various countries to Uzbek parade, and there are Catholics who are in the Orange Order, not realizing it's the Church of Rome. It's in Catholicism, and you won't sanction Catholicism by your attendance at Mass or any Catholic ceremony. But there's a statement called the Qualifications of an Orangeman saying you will refrain from uncharitable references to your Roman Catholic brethren. They all say Roman Catholic, not simply Catholic. Some of them certainly didn't hear this and would say things which were highly disobliging about us. Well, call us Taigs, which is possibly derived from the Irish word for native, Taig, or the boy's name Taig, things like that. Or I can't think. We tend not to call ourselves papists or papishes. Thinking that Protestantism somehow emancipates the mind. Read that Max Weber. What was it? The Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Catholicism, we have authoritarian governments, which in the 19th century was broadly true. There were some absolute monarchies which were clashes in the 1880s. Not many people killed. The Orange Order marching through, Catholics trying to prevent this. So people often not in the Orange Order, just hangers-on fighting, wearing the bowler hats and some respectability. Also, it's a hard hat before they had modern hard hats on the construction sites. And a bit like the Freemasons, I scratch your back, you scratch me back, my back, exchange of favours, charging each other's mates' rates. So getting their orange collarettes out and getting their suits out ready to march around the 12th of July. There are various other loyal orders. There's the Royal Black Preceptory, the Royal Purple Arch, which are very minor and often within the Orange Order. Indeed, there's the Apprentice Boys of Derry, which is separate, was found rather later, and you can only be sworn into it within the walls of Derry. That to do with the Siege of Derry, but I shan't digress into that just now. So the Orange Order is not a 100%, and they're mostly elderly, so they're not really getting young people in. And they voluntarily rerouted many marches in the 20th century. The Catholic community started taking the gravest possible exception to these orange marches, and they often rerouted, not just cancelled them, but they want to keep a few, and these are being, people are trying to encroach on these, like at Drum Creek, call them a hate group and things like that. And it's true, some of them, Orange, which is allowed to say they are sort of the British ultra-nationalists and they're anti-Catholic. They're always against the IRA and ILA, but would be willing to kill any Catholic, even me, who is a unionist. So that's what the Orange Order is about. It's not a very strong and influential organisation. And the RCU of Ireland, as in that's the governing body of the Orange Order, had ex officio representation upon it. They could nominate some people to the Ulster Unionist Council, but they still be members of the Ulster Unionist Party. But they no longer the Orange Order itself is no longer guaranteed direct representation on the Ulster Unionist Council, because you might be a member of the Orange Order and vote for another party. The DCI might vote SDLP or Sinn Féin. Now the thing is, the Orange Order says it's all about loyal to the crown, being Protestants. So it's conditional, right? It's contractual kingship. Supposing the British royal family became Catholics, you wouldn't have to be loyal to them again. Another point is it doesn't actually say about the Act of Union. So in Great Britain, be a Commonwealth realm. But so they often wrong. That's that. Many clashes around whether they'd be allowed to march and often came to fighting, real fighting. So it was a charity as well, donating money to help each other out, usually, and to other charities. As in, if somebody helping them find a job, we all have to help each other with all this in this together. Reading the Bible, there's a religious aspect, there's a more political aspect to it. So that was the Orange Order is about. So there's a very brief potted history of the Orange Order. It's a shadow of its former self, and its former headquarters in Dublin. Well, that's enough. So please follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and please, yeah, donate to me, book me for online lessons in all sorts of things, in French, in English language, English literature, English as a foreign language, history, geography, religious studies, and politics. Why have we time about war back to 1997? I'm not sure.